Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video for simonsthestamp.com. Today I'm going to be walking you through the contents of the November 2017 card kit, as well as a card that I made using the contents of the card kit. Starting out by showing you some 6x6 pattern paper that's included. And this 6x6 paper is so amazing because there's gold foiling on some of the sheets and there's a lot of different patterns. I thought the colors in this 6x6 pad were beautiful. I'm going to pull out this gold foiled striped pattern to use on my card for today. Then I'll set that aside. There's also some 8.5 by 11 sheets of specialty paper, some embossed, really heavy textured paper that's just beautiful. And then there are 4 sheets of smooth cardstock that you can use for your card bases or for stamping. There's 2 colors of green, a cream, and also a dark chocolate sheet. Then there's a 12 by 12 sheet of die cut stickers, and these are really beautiful because they kind of have that same metallic coating. These aren't foiled, but it has kind of a metallic gold ink that's used. And then we have some gold leaves that you can place under some flowers or anything like that. And then there's also this 6x8 stamp set called Kind Flowers. And this is the first time that Simon has ever included a 6x8 stamp set in a card kit, so I thought that was really kind of cool. There's a die that matches for the word kind, and you can use it for the individual word or for the word that's on top of the flowers in the stamp set. And I'm going to use the stamp set quite a bit for today's card. I'm going to start out by putting some Nina Solar White cardstock inside my MISTI stamp positioning tool. I'm going to prep the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to ink up my stamp. I'm using the individual kind stamp, and I'm inking that up with some clear embossing ink from Simon. I'm going to stamp that down and then coat the word with some antique gold heat embossing powder from Simon. And I'm using this color of heat embossing powder in particular because it's a really good match to the gold foiling on that pattern paper. So I'm pressing that powder down onto that stamped area really well, shaking off the excess, and then heating this with a heat tool until it's smooth and melted. And I'm actually going to kind of set this aside. I won't be using that particular stamping for a little while. It'll come back at the end of the card. But because I am going to die cut it out later, I've decided to use the rest of that paper just to figure out the colors I'm going to use for coloring the flowers. So I got these colors mainly from that pattern paper, but then I added this kind of dark teal shade. There's actually more of a dark gray in the papers, but I really loved the look of this teal. So those are the Copic colors I'm using for my coloring. I'm going to stamp that floral stamp now. I've got some more of that Nina Solar White cardstock. This is the 80-pound version. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did before by stamping it down onto the paper, except I'm going to use some Barely Beige ink. This is from Simon, and this is an ink that works well with Copic Markers. It's kind of a light tan color, and it's so that you can do some no-line coloring. But I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to leave that stamp inside my MISTI tool so I can come back and stamp in the same position. And I'm going to go ahead and color over this entire area. So I've sped up the video process just so now I'm not sitting here for a long time talking about all the coloring, because I did do very, very simple coloring on this. Mostly just solid color, and if I did add a little bit of shading, it was just with one other color. So I did add a little bit of darker areas to the leaves. I just put down the lighter shade, put down the darker for the shadows, and then went back over it with the lighter shade, and it blends those colors pretty well. You don't need to have like perfect blending for these, because I'm going to be stamping and embossing over those lines once again, and the areas where the color is peeking through will be minimized, so you don't have to worry too much about really intricate blending. I did add a light gray, I believe this was a C2, just to add a little bit of shading for the white flowers. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually take my heat tool and heat set this just a little bit, because Copic marker ink does take a little bit longer to dry. That's what makes it so great for blending. And I'm going to be doing some heat embossing over this right away, so I wanted to make sure it was completely dry. And I'm actually going to test it to make sure that it's ready to add some heat embossing. So before I stamp my greeting stamp again, I'm going to put on some powder and shake it off, and it looks like everything was dry and ready to go. So I'm putting this back into my MISTI tool, and I'm going to put some anti-static powder on top of that to make sure the area is completely prepped and ready to go. And then I'm going to ink up my stamp with that clear embossing ink once again. And this is going to actually stamp directly over the area where I had that Barely Beige stamping. And I'm going to stamp this twice. I want to make sure that I have a really, really good impression. And since this is such a big stamp, I wasn't sure if I was hitting all of those areas. So I'm going to reposition my cardstock back in the corner of my MISTI tool to make sure it's in the exact same spot. It sort of lifted when I stamped down. And then I'll stamp this greeting for the second time, the greeting and flowers. So I'm going to take this out of my MISTI tool and bring it over to that coffee filter with embossing powder once again, and I'll just sprinkle this on, and you can see how well that caught all the lines of the stamping, and it's not clinging to areas where I don't want it. So this is a really great example of making sure you prep the area before you add your embossing powder. So I'm going to heat set this until it's smooth and melted once again, and make sure you tip it in the light and make sure there aren't any areas where it didn't get embossing, because I did catch a few areas and I had to heat set it a little bit some more. So now I'm going to take that dark teal color of my Copic marker, and I'm going to just color the top edge of this cardstock here, and then I'm going to do some stamping on top. And this is going to be the rest of the greeting. Prep that with my anti-static powder tool, and then I have this little strip of words from the stamp set that says, "You are my kind of person." So I'm going to stamp that in some clear embossing ink once again, and then I can go ahead and add some embossing powder over the top, and then I'll be heat setting this. And this particular very small sentiment has very, very small words. The font is very, very small, but it's not so small that you can't heat emboss it. Sometimes there are some greeting stamps out there that are super, super tiny, and when you heat emboss it, it sort of kind of blobs out the letters and they're hard to read. In this case, it wasn't a problem at all. So I'm going to cut out the word kind in the middle, because I'm going to have the large kind that's on the flowers be that section of the greeting. And then I also fussy cut around this entire greeting. Now, I did debate if I was going to leave a white border around all the flowers, which I think would have been a good move, because it was particularly hard to cut around this, around those little tiny stems of leaves. So I'm going to take my dark cardstock, my dark chocolate cardstock, and cut that down to a card base and score that at 5.5 to create a side folding card, or a top folding card, I'm sorry. And then I cut down that pattern paper so I had a nice strip that could go from top to bottom on this card. So I'm just cutting that down to 5.5 tall. And then I used some Tombow Extreme adhesive to adhere this down onto the front of my card. This is going right down the center of the card. I then took some foam tape and I cut it down to little itty bitty strips, and I put those small little pieces on the flower sections that were hanging off the edge of this large cluster, and then I put a foam tape right down the center. And this is so that as I adhere this down, that none of those flower pieces will just be hanging off without any support underneath them. So I'm kind of centering that so that the kind word is kind of right center over that striped pattern paper. And then I used foam tape to put the last bit of those leaves on, because I did accidentally cut off a portion of those leaves. So I'm going to take the two tiny strips that I cut earlier, and I put some foam adhesive right behind them. And I'll put the top one right above the word kind and the other one right below. And this just finishes off the greeting and makes sure that that large kind area is in the center of the greeting. If you remember back, I did have that other stamping of the word kind. So I'm going to actually take that coordinating die that comes with the card kit, and I'm going to cut this out. And this cuts out the perfect outline of these words, and then you can pop that over the top. So I think it'd be really fun to have that even embossed on some pink cardstock. I think that would look really pretty. Put it on pink cardstock or a different color. So that is the card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be back very soon with some more inspiration for next month's card kit. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.